Hey, Dean.
Hello, Marcus.
Hello. Hey, so we were just talking about Stanley Jordan's low voice in one of my videos, like low
Oh
level.
yeah, it's just that I discovered in Zoom. You learn more about Zoom every time you use it, and I
Yeah.
use it a lot for classes. So I'm always looking for ways to improve the experience.
Yeah.
And when Stanley Jordan was on one of your podcasts, he had a lot of cool stuff to say, but his microphone was really, really, really quiet. And I discovered later on that you can record the audio for all of your participants individually.
Yes.
You could do a little bit of post mixing after that.
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
I don't
Yes.
know that it would have saved that one because you had to know about it in advance, and he was awfully quiet. I don't know if you boosted it all the way to the top, you might have heard the fan on his MacBook.
Yeah. I can't remember if I actually fixed it, but I mean, if I fixed the video, but I did fix the audio. So in the
Okay.
in the podcast, well, the audio file I have is fine. But yeah, there you go. Like it's all an experiment. This whole period of our lives, the past, I don't know, 18 months, or no, not quite 18 months, but
About
uh,
that, yeah.
and
2020 was more or less a wash. 21 is kind of a roller coaster up and down, but yeah,
yeah, I
a
agree.
learning experience is a very nice and a very nice way of putting it. Better than it deserves.
Yeah, yeah, Dean. So the good thing is that I have met you in person. I have seen you demonstrate your art, or one of uh, well, I don't know how you would
Which
call it, if
one?
it's art or craft. Exactly, like you had a you can tell us, you had a potato in your
I had a
hand, and
potato. I was. How do you explain? How do you explain any of this to anybody? Um, you know, uh, I'm one of the, without. Oh my God, where do you start with a topic like this to somebody who's
yeah.
never seen it or is only superficially familiar with it? I carve pumpkins.
Mhm.
I carve potatoes. I carve carrots and radishes and basically vegetables, which makes everything that I do ephemeral. Nothing lasts except in a photograph. But when I try and explain this to somebody, I'll say I'm a pumpkin carver, and they'll say, "Oh, jack-o'-lanterns," and I'm like, no, not really, not really. And yeah, when I was at Three of a Perfect Pair camp in 2019, I guess was the first time I went. I'm coming back, by the way.
Cool.
I'll be there in August. But I was scared to death of all kinds of things. And I think maybe the thing that I was expected to be nervous, I expected to be nervous about, meeting the hosts, meeting you, working and taking workshops, and will I measure up or will I humiliate myself? So long as I don't humiliate myself, I think I'm happy with that. I can live with that. But I had a lot of nervous energy there, so I was like finding ways to not fall apart during the week. And carving a potato, I think I did a couple of potatoes that week. I carved one for Henry. um, how do you? I carve faces into vegetables.
I mean, like the most
I'm
unpopular,
struggling here, Marcus,
the most unpopular question with people who are being interviewed is why.
because
So
you don't understand it, and I love watching you squirm trying to understand it.
you know
I
what
love
I
watching an audience twist in the wind. I'm ready for that answer. Why? Because it makes people twitch.
Mhm,
It's
mhm,
unexpected. Just in terms of the audience reaction reasons why. It's unexpected. When people encounter it for the first time, the pumpkin is looking back at them. It's not
mhm,
like it has a face.
mhm,
It's like it has a face
mhm,
and it's looking
mhm.
at them. And that's a little unsettling, even though
Mm-hmm.
it's a fun kind of unsettling.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the most common questions that I get is, how long do they last? What can you do to make them last? And the answer is, you really can't, because with a few exceptions, these are pickled, but with a few exceptions, they all rot. And as soon as I tell everybody, well, it's going to rot, I can see them not accepting that. They start looking for ways to get around it. Have you tried this? Have you tried that? Have you sprayed it with something? Have you coated it with Vaseline? Have you done this, that, or the other thing? I'm like, yeah, it's going to rot. It's going to rot, and it's going to be covered with Vaseline. It's going to be even more gross. If I do these things that you're suggesting, it's just, it'll be revolting at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the reaction that I get from people, that insistence on rejecting the reality of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess that is just a sign of like utmost respect for what you do, because they sort of like want to preserve your artwork somehow. I think it's really is a big compliment, and I think, I mean,
I accept it as a compliment.
even like the stuff that we can see behind you is kind of like pretty impressive, right? And so, but like, well, I wouldn't have asked you why, because I don't ask why. It's just like I ask how.
That's your reason for being, Marcus, is to.
I ask how. I ask how, though. I never ask.
Okay, no,
why, or very rarely, very rarely. But I mean, we get to the why, maybe because I would really like to know how you got to do what you do, and like how this because like I've seen you play guitar, and so like to me you were like, the impression you had on me was like, this guy is an artist of some sort. Like, I didn't know exactly what you were doing, and I think it was only on the last night of the camp that I saw you carve the potato. So I
think that the last day of camp was the only day that I actually did.
Yeah. So how? Well, tell me a little bit about, well, your life.
Dude, one of the things when I do media interviews, which this is nice because this is a conversation. This doesn't feel like an interview. And it's, when I do media interviews, I usually inform the reporter in advance before the camera is rolling. Don't ask me any open-ended questions. If you ask me an open-ended question, I'm going to babble.
Mm-hmm.
You just asked me like the biggest question.
Please
tell me about
your life. Please babble.
Well, I was born in Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
My family lived in Huntington Beach when I was an infant. That didn't last long. We corrected that. Eventually, we made our way to the Hudson Valley fairly quickly. I think I was 5 when my mom moved my brother and me to Armonk, and we lived with our grandparents for a couple of years. And then I grew up in the Hudson Valley in Dutchess County, just outside of Poughkeepsie. And I've always been curious. I've always been the guy that if you tell him that can't be done or that shouldn't be done, I might ask, that shouldn't be done, I might ask why. But if you tell me that can't be done, I want to try it. I'm that guy. I'm also the class clown, to the point where it's amusing for a while. And then most of my classes would reach a point where it's like, as soon as they would hear my voice, they'd go, it's Deane. I was the guy who was kind of not a great student, but I would show up in art class and toss my sketch pad on the pile. We had to have keep like a running sketch pad for the art teacher, and she would review it each time we would come into class. we'd bring her sketch pad, she'd see what we did, and she'd make a little red check mark next to each page just to acknowledge that it was done. She wasn't grading it or anything like that. But I'd throw my sketch pad onto the pile and I'd crawl up under the counter and fall asleep and nap through the entire class, which made my classmates nuts. One woman in particular, she's told me about this recently in the last couple of years. She said, "You were the guy who always napped on the counter, and I was busting my ass to learn the stuff and to do the things. And then you come sailing in, you toss your sketch pad over there, you do whatever's required of you, and then you fall asleep next to the record player, where I was generally like playing a whole lot of prog music and stuff like that nobody else in the class really wanted to hear."
Mm-hmm.
I was that guy, you know. Feel free to jump in at any point. And
No. I'm listening. I'm listening. It's.
I never know where I'm going from 1 second.
I must have said this a couple of times already. Talking with people on the podcast is like I don't remember my childhood, and I certainly don't remember my teens, which is interesting. So like whenever I hear a story that somebody tells, like I get a little glimpse, like a little bit of light comes on in my head, and I remember, I remember things. And I just had a little bit of a memory of like never doing my homework. I mean, never doing it at home, actually. So just doing like 2 minutes before class started. I was just, anyway, like just some memories came back as you mentioned.
That would have been me, except I suspect just knowing the way your brain works, a little bit of the way your brain works, I would think that it's first of all, it surprises me that you would procrastinate before doing your homework. But if you were waiting until 2 minutes more before class, I'm going to bet the quality of your work was better than the quality of my work. I would have three months to do a project for my Spanish class in 7th grade. And the whole marking period, the whole term. And then on the last day when the thing was due, I'd be like, well, I got to slap something together. And then I just grab a bunch of things. And, if like at one point, I think it was Spanish class too. I had been assigned to make a Spanish flag. Not difficult. What is it? 3 stripes of different color fabric. And all I had to do was sew them together. And I had a sewing machine and I had the fabric. I stapled them together. That didn't work. So I glued them together with Elmer's glue, and that didn't dry in time. and I pulled when I had to present it to the class and to the teacher, I pulled it out of my parka. I had it in a pocket in my parka, and I hadn't even folded it up. I just pulled out this rag and went, and the whole thing fell apart. It's like, I tend to doubt that the quality of your assignments were at that low ebb.
I don't know. I mean, I wasn't ever challenged in school. That's sort of like a sad fact of my past.
So everything just kind of more or less you got it, and you didn't need to learn it, or
I didn't need to learn it. I think I was clever enough. I was a good talker. So I was able to convince people so maybe I was able to give the right answers, and they didn't really care if I did my homework or something. I really don't remember exactly, but the other side of the coin is that I never really learned anything properly at that time. And I was 20 when I first even realized that there is such a thing as learning. It's pretty bizarre. I mean, like I'm only 48, right? And like the first 20 years of my life, I wasn't even aware that there's such a thing as learning.
Right. It's like I didn't learn in school so much, but this is something that comes up when I teach sculpting classes. And people, because I don't have any formal training, people will call me self-taught. Well, you're self-taught, so I can be self-taught. And I hear there's a A phenomenon that I've noticed for many years, that when people talk about being self-taught, they proclaim it with a certain pride. I am self-taught.
Hmm.
There's a certain validity to that pride, but at the same time, I reject the idea that anyone is self-taught. I don't think anyone can be self-taught. We don't live in bubbles.
Hmm. Yeah.
If we do live in bubbles, we're not learning anything. And we're and if it's like a self-enforced bubble, say of privilege, just you've never had to struggle, then you're kind of in self-enforcing your bubble, and you're
Yeah.
not. But at the same time, but I say that I don't think that's really possible to live in a bubble to that degree where you don't learn from outside influence. And so being self-taught, I don't think exists. Being informally taught is a widespread condition. I'm informally taught. Everyone that I've ever worked with or met or seen examples of what they do in their chosen discipline, whether it's music, visual art, speaking, literature, whatever, we're all influenced by other examples of things.
Yeah.
And I think that's important to remember. I, I try to remember it. I don't think that I'm doing it again. I'm babbling.
No, no, no. I think it's a very good point. Like, also, I think that there are phases, certainly in my life, where teachers were very important, and I had some really great teachers. I have to
Mhm.
say, looking back, some really good teachers in music. I have to say, like, you know. But music was also the only thing I was really interested in, by the way. But I think sometimes there are phases where it's about like where you study for yourself, right? So where
Mhm.
it's not that you're self-taught, but where you raise the energy to actually study for yourself,
Yes.
where you study because you love it, because it's what you want to do, and it's not somebody else. It's not your father telling you to practice piano,
Right.
right? It's it's Deane actually picking up a guitar and figuring out the solo to Close to the Edge or whatever. I don't know.
Oh, you think highly of me, sir. I'd be okay with the solo from Rumble by Link Ray.
Yes. But you know what I mean, like it's when the
Jack the Ripper.
motivation.
Jack the Ripper, the solo is just a pick screen. There's nothing to it.
When the motivation is really coming from deep inside, and there's
Mhm.
and it's the actual interaction with the material that you work with that is inspiring, and so how
That's
was
one of
that
the
for?
greatest feelings in the world too, is being familiar enough with something to be curious and to make the attempt,
Mhm.
and kind of screwing around with it a little bit. That's one level of it. And then you dial in a little bit further, and you make more of an attempt. And then I think what you're describing is the way I experience it anyway, is in any discipline, music or art or anything, when I decide, I can feel it almost consciously. I can decide, this is going to be where I dig in.
Mhm.
This is where I'm going to push past the membrane of not being able
Mhm.
to get onto the other side of that, and just to dig in and do it. And those moments are some of the best.
Mhm.
They're the most in isolated from the outside world. It's where I'm dialed in here, and I am focused on this, whether it's guitar or sometimes piano. I don't play piano, but I understand the way the keyboard works, and I understand where the notes are, and
Mhm.
and 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 whatever. So I can kind of move my way through things.
Mhm.
But because it's more of an unfamiliar area of music, a different part of my brain kicks in.
Mhm.
It's the same thing with visual art, that if for most of my life I considered myself a painter. or an illustrator. I do two-dimensional stuff. Ever since I can remember, I've been a two-dimensional visual artist. And when I started sculpting, I knew for years before I actually got my hands into sculpting something that I wanted to get my hands into something, that there would be something tactile about it. I wanted to squish the clay, or, whittle and carve the wood, or whatever it is. And when I finally did it, all of the things that I thought that I was confident with, or that I knew that I was in the driver's seat, that I had a certain level of control over two-dimensional stuff. And then I started working in 3 dimensions, and I realized, okay, this face right here is not flat. This face has to wrap around, and it has to be, there's more to it than just what you're seeing from the front. So they're not shapes of outlines. They're planes and forms, and this goes here, and this goes here, and this goes here. And it exercised a different creative muscle in my mind.
Mm-hmm. And at which point in your career as an artist did you start sculpting?
I dabbled with it every now and then, but really in earnest about 10 years ago. And believe it or not with clay. My first real disciplined approach to sculpting was pumpkins.
Mm-hmm.
I saw examples of what could be done with a sculptural approach to pumpkins, and I was curious. I wanted to know how.
Mm-hmm.
Your question, how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you do that? Irrelevant to me. I just
Mm-hmm.
wanted to do it. It was like I wanted to try it. And the first few attempts were satisfactory enough that it kept me wanting to do more. That's another thing, is that when I fail at something, or where I don't feel that I've succeeded to the level that I wanted to succeed, or that I was hoping to succeed, it doesn't, I don't know how if this is unusual or not, but this is how I think. That doesn't diminish my desire to continue. I want to keep doing it. I want to try it again. I want to try it again. I want to get a little bit better. It's like, whatever didn't work out that time, okay, that was a little bit, okay, what can I do to fix that? And then that brain, that dialing in muscle in my brain kicks in and goes, okay, this is one of those moments. Let's get this. So the first few that I did were okay enough for me to feel encouraged about it. And I think it's just ironic that the silliness of pumpkins, the whimsy and the ridiculousness of carving like a Bernini style face into a squash, and that appeals to my sense of humor as well. Just the fact that how ridiculous it is, but it kept going. And I think the reason for that, I've thought about this a little bit too over the years. The reason that it was easy to keep going was not just because of my obstinance, my stubborn tenacity to get into things. It was also because pumpkins are low responsibility. Since I knew it was going to rot in a couple of days, it didn't matter to me as much whether or not I got it exactly perfectly right. And I've never gotten one exactly perfect to what I would like to have it be. There's always a compromise when I look at the end result of anything here 10 years later. And now I sculpt in clay, and I've gone back to wood, sculpting in mahogany and basswood and things like that. I still don't feel like I've reached perfection.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I ever will.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I ever want to,
Mm-hmm.
because then it wouldn't be fun anymore.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, 10 years is not much for an art, for acquiring the craft even.
Right.
So it's
Well,
pretty
I'm
amazing.
59. 10 years goes by like that at this point.
I know, and what I mean is, like, it's amazing, like that it took you so long away to find, right?
Doing other things. I had
Yeah, yeah.
don't have
But
time for everything.
yeah, but no, what I mean is, and what I would like to know is, so once you started and you said like, okay, so it doesn't matter if it's not perfect, I can just do it. I can try again. I can do this over and over again. Um, do you Are you a person who kind of like works constantly? Like, do you like every day, or is there like a certain rhythm to how you do things? You know, because like for me, it's more like I have a long period where I don't do anything, and then I have like a burst of a few days where I do a lot of work. You know, so that's how I function there. But because just even just to get to the level that you're at right now, with your uh, pumpkin carving, right? Yeah, let's laugh about it a little more.
You can't say it without snickering, right? You're like,
It's fantastic. That's great. So, how did you do it? Like, was there sort of like, did you become obsessed with it somehow
oh
for a
yeah,
while?
oh
Yeah.
yeah, I still am. There are an increasing number of pumpkin carvers in the world. Um, I think I'm
That's
fortunate.
that's a good sentence too.
Increasing the pumpkin community. There's another phrase for it. There is such a thing. Okay. Come back to that question. Let me tell you that my first experience with realizing that I was not in a bubble was I saw a few examples. I tried a few things. I got pretty good. I started putting stuff on social media. I started getting invitations. I started getting work as a result. I mean, really significant work, internationally recognized work. But the first time that I ever did it outside of my studio
Mhm.
in public, that wasn't just like a little farmer's market where he's the guy off in the corner carving the pumpkin. I was invited to the Columbus Zoo. Used to have a pumpkin carving contest, the Jack Hanna Pumpkin Championships or something like that. I don't even remember what the name of it was, but I got invited to it. Um, I showed up, and there were a few other people that I'd seen their names, and who I've since gotten to be really good friends with. But when I showed up, and I was expecting like a few people, and we're all going to carve pumpkins, and what's this all about? And there were 20 or 30 pumpkin carvers, and I realized, oh my God, I've just landed in the strangest subset of the cultural subset of society. Of these are the pumpkin people. I was like, it was like Todd Browning's Freaks. One of us, one of us. And that moment was eye-opening to me, because I was like, I realized it's like there is a pumpkin culture.
Mhm.
I just wanted to throw that in there. That
Mhm.
moment was equal
Yeah.
parts surprising
Mhm.
and appealing to my sense of the ridiculous.
Yeah.
What was the question again?
If like if you are still obsessed with carving pumpkins.
Oh yeah, yeah. Um, well, that's how we got into that. The whole pumpkin
Yeah,
thing.
like how do you work? Like, do you work every day? Do you
I work
like
as much
how?
as I can. The last 18 months have been odd because I don't have a pattern.
Mhm.
I don't have a sleep pattern that's recognizable. I have well, in normal times, normal for Deane anyway. Um, I will go back and forth between visual art and musical art, and I kind of use one to hide from the other. It's like when I'm running out of ideas for music, I start sculpting, and I go back to pumpkins, or I pull out some clay, and I'll do some collectible figurines and things like that, portraiture and stuff. And then when I start running out of ideas for that, or pumpkins, for a while, in the early years, I would, at the end of the season, when pumpkins were no longer available, okay, I got to do something else. So then I'd go back to music. So I would, it was like a pendulum swing back and forth between music and visual art. And I would use one to procrastinate the other, which I would follow the path of least resistance. I'd go wherever the inspiration had me on a given day. And then when that ran dry, I would go running, screaming to the other end of the spectrum, just to keep busy, just to keep producing things and keeping my brain running. These days, it's more of, first of all, it doesn't matter anymore to me whether or not pumpkins are available year round, because I've found that I can carve other forms of squash, and potatoes are a big thing. I don't have any potatoes right here at arm's length to show you. Butternut squashes are a good one. You know, the kind of hourglass shaped things. Sweet potatoes, stuff like that. So there's always something that I can carve year round if I want to. And this past year, I've been keeping as busy as possible with music projects, the quarantine sessions, things that we were doing. Started off just as an excuse to stay busy, and then it kind of snowballed. And the people who've been involved in those on a regular basis, like Bassini, not just Bassini. I mean, there's a bunch of them. Some of the campers in particular, but not limited to the Three of a Perfect Pair camp. Anybody I know who's a musician, I'll put out an open call when I do these things, and I'll say, I want to record a song. What song do you want to record, and who wants to do it? Anybody, and all are welcome. I don't care what your level of skill is for this thing. Just contribute something, and it'll be included. And those projects they've kept me busy. They've kept the other people busy. And I think they were well received enough that once we'd done a few of them, that it got to the point where if I said I want to do this, I didn't have to explain as much of it to get new people involved. There would be enough people to say, okay, he's doing another one, let's do it. I'm babbling.
That's okay. So with the carving, so let me just get a little more annoying here, because I do want to know how you do it.
Okay.
And I don't want you to teach it to me right now, which it's probably one way of explaining how to do it, but I want your specific way of doing it. I want to learn about how you do it. So like one of the first questions I want to ask here is, like, there is this cliche that some artists kind of like, they have a piece of granite, right? And they see something in it. Like they interact with the material, and they get a sense of
Michelangelo quote.
Yeah, exactly.
I recognize the angel within, and I carve until he has been released.
Yeah, is that also true for potatoes and pumpkins? To an extent.
I've got so many flippant answers for that one. I want to give you as dignified an answer as I can to that without turning to a wisecrack, which is my default setting. You know that, right? I don't think I do. And the more I understand about Michelangelo in particular, and Renaissance sculptors, Bernini was my favorite for a lot of reasons. But I almost think that if that quote is a real quote attributed to Michelangelo, I almost feel like he was being flippant. Like, okay, you're not going to understand it. I can't make you understand it unless you do it, unless you try it. So here's a pat answer just to satisfy you because you asked the question. I recognize the angel, and I carve until the angel is released. I think there's a certain balance that I have anyway. When I have a pumpkin, I have a blank pumpkin, Or yeah, let's restrict this to pumpkins. If I have a blank pumpkin, and I do, and I look at it and I see the shape of it. Is it tall? Is it round? Is it wide? Does it have an unusual asymmetry to it or something? Is there something strange and twisted about it? And I'll look at it for a while and I'll go, what can I do with that? But I'm not recognizing I don't see a face in there. I will say, okay, there's enough material here for me to force a face into it. Or to, I can come up with a face. I can come up with a face with where just by staring at myself in a mirror and make expressions until I find one that looks like it might fit into the material that I've got in front of me. And then I go into it. And then I'm sketching. I'm not following a blueprint. I start with the basics. I'll start with the eyebrow, and I'll start to move out the orbits of the eyes and to create the cheekbones and the edges of the nose. If it's going to be an anatomical face, if it's going to be a cartoon face, I might not do a nose at all. I might just do eyes and a mouth. And as I'm sketching that out, every stroke of the tool presents a new opportunity. So as I'm sketching, it continues to evolve. The pumpkin is guiding me as well as I'm directing the pumpkin. I think that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. And that's actually what I was sort of expecting you to say, actually.
Well, and I start out with reference material. I'll start out with, staring at my own face in a mirror, or I'll have reference photos of somebody. I don't like doing likenesses as a rule, because there's too much to compare. It's like, if it's a recognizable famous face, I probably don't want to do it. I have done a lot. I did one last year of Oliver Hardy from Laurel and Hardy, and it turned out really well as a likeness. That's unusual for me, because I'll start off with a likeness to give me a starting point. And then as I'm working on it, I find myself looking less and less over at my reference material. I like to have the reference material there. I like to have a mirror there, so that it's like, okay, now how does the musculature work around the eye here? So I'll get in there and okay, now I see how that works. This goes over the top, this goes under the bottom. And I'm not looking at my reference material for, is it a face? I'm looking at it in terms of, what are the shapes doing? What are the forms doing? As I continue to work and I'm looking less and less at the reference material, the sculpt just kind of takes over. That part's harder to describe. It's harder to describe what that feels like. It's harder to describe what is going on in my mind, because a lot of that at that point, there's the deliberate, intentional part of starting off. This is my material. These are the tools that I've got. This is my reference, my starting point reference material. And then there's the deliberate part of trying to block all of that in and get the basics in there. And then as it starts to transition into that area where the pumpkin and the pumpkin and I are starting to lead each other, and then the pumpkin starts to take over and all that, that's harder to describe in metrics. And I think that's why it feels magical to a lot of people. It's why it looks magical to somebody who's not doing it. If you're in there and you're in the moment and you are intentionally removing material and shaping material and you have a goal that you're going to, that fills in a lot of the blanks that somebody else looking over your shoulder as you're working. And most of what I do especially in October, when it's Halloween season, it's a performance. I'm not in a bubble here. I'm not in my studio. I'm out. It's all a public performance. It's like performance art. But when somebody's looking over my shoulder, they don't have the benefit of knowing what I'm thinking as I'm doing
Yeah.
things.
Mm-hmm.
So to them, it looks like it's emerging out of nothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I'll admit that there's a benefit to me on that. It makes me look more like a wizard. But that's another thing, is like I'm uncomfortable being the guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm uncomfortable being the one that the others look to. And I'm by no means the only one, but at that level. But when I hear people, I get a lot of the same questions, a lot of the same statements. I hear them over my shoulder because I'm busy working and I'm not looking at who's behind me.
Mm-hmm.
But how do you do that? How do you make it last? How do you keep yours from rotting? Blah, 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 all those questions. And then occasionally I'll hear somebody say, oh, I could never do that. I don't have that guy's really talented. I could never do that. And that's like throwing down a gauntlet to me. That's when I'll put my tool down and I'll actually look up and make eye contact with whoever's speaking, and I'll pull them in. I'll hand them the tool. I will show them how it works, and I'll let them carve on whatever I've been doing. Even if they slice the nose off, it doesn't matter to me. I just want to bring them in and encourage them to try it. Because I found that most people, if they're encouraged to try something and they do try it, they enjoy it.
Yeah.
And
So the magic, the magic that you just mentioned, do you still experience it?
oh yeah,
There you go.
yeah.
Mm.
I mean, just because I have the benefit of being involved and woven in with the process, I know what's going on in my head more or less. If I'm having conscious thought, clearly that's easy. But just observational thought process of what's going on in my head, I do have the benefit of that. But at the same time, a lot of it is semi-conscious, and that does feel like, whoa, I love finishing something or getting to a point where I look at it and I'm just, look at what I did.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I like surprising myself. There is another phenomenon pattern that I've noticed in my mind as I'm working. When I start a pumpkin and I'm first scraping it off and I'm blocking in the basic forms. Ask me about basic forms in a minute versus details. But when I'm first doing it, there's what I do is meticulous. It takes a long time to do this. And in the first hour or so while I'm working, I'm going, okay, this is the first hour. This is the blocking in part. I've done this 1,000 times. I can do this without really thinking about what I'm doing and blah, 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 blah. Okay. And there's a certain question as to whether or not I'm going to reach the level that I'm hoping for. Am I going to like this, or am I going to be merely satisfied with this? That's the first hour or so. And at some points, somewhere following that, I dial in. There will be a moment where I go, okay, now I'm happy with it. I'm not done with it. I know that there's a lot more to do with it, but now I know it's going where I want to. And that's a moment that I really, really enjoy every time that I do anything. Sculpting or painting or music or anything. It's like, I'm like, I can't get it. I can't get it. I'm still pushing. I think I can get it. I know I can get something good, but I'm not there yet. And then, oh, I'm there.
Mm-hmm.
That feels awesome. That's almost better than the final, the completion of the work and knowing that it's done. That moment, it's almost like a release.
Yeah.
That I haven't wasted the last 2 hours on just another one.
I'm thinking about that part of the process where you even, as you just demonstrated, you don't even have the words to describe how you do it or what happens that once you go beyond or that's when you get to the point where sort of the magic happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does it compare to for me as a musician? Um, how does it compare with the act of making music or improvising or something like that? Is there something there that has sort of like a similar for me, like I was just thinking, like, how cool would it be if Deane, rather than creating these, I'm just going to say it, okay,
Sure.
like more like the predictable thing, like faces or whatever, like stuff that can be compared to other people's work, probably where there is like a way that things can be uh, entered in a competition because you can say, okay, this face looks more natural than that or whatever. Like, I don't know how it works, but anyway,
Right.
what would be so awesome is like if Deane Arnold would just do abstract art in pumpkins, right? And I'm sure you can say something about that, but that's sort of like where it gets very interesting
That's
to
when
me.
they start to rot, and I'm no longer carving them, and they're starting to sag and dry out and get moldy and everything like that. I enjoy that part of it too, because I don't know what's happening next, and it becomes very
Yes,
abstract
yes, and can you
or
and can you
impressionist.
and can you do that as you carve? That's the question.
Uh, I don't think I've done anything fully abstract. I've
Mhm.
done something a lot. Almost everything I do has a certain level of
Mhm.
impressionism to it. I still want to come back to basic forms versus
Yes,
details.
yes, I haven't
Um,
forgot.
but I don't think I've done anything fully abstract in in pumpkins.
Mhm.
I've done abstract paintings, some of which I really love. I've got a really good one on my it's hanging in my living room.
Mhm.
Um, and that one was actually, that was an interesting process when I did that, because I, prior to that, I've always admired abstract. I'm a huge fan of Jackson Pollock and some of the de Kooning stuff.
Mhm.
For too many thoughts, stay focused.
Yeah, I mean,
um, but I'd never actually tried it. And there was one period where I hadn't painted in years, and I had a blank canvas, a big blank canvas that was on my easel, which was in my garage. It wasn't even in a place where I would normally work on anything creatively. But I left it there, white canvas on the easel, for I think it was like 5 or 6 years before I finally touched it. And the reason I left it there was because every time I would pull the car into the garage, my headlights would light up this plain blank white canvas, taunting me and going, "I'm still here and you haven't touched me." So roughly about 5 years went by, and I finally, okay, one day I was motivated, and the rule for I set up a certain set of ground rules for myself when I started it. I want it to be abstract. I want it to be something that has a lot of big motions in rather than doing things like this, which is how I normally would have painted in the past in a tempera kind of mode, or a super photorealistic sort of approach. I
mhm.
wanted something that had a lot of texture and a lot that felt like my hands were in it. Similar to what I was talking about with what I like about the tactile nature of sculpting. I wanted to do the same thing with this painting. And I know, because I know myself, that as I'm working on it, if I see something that starts to look like something, I'll dial in and I'll start making it look more like that something that is happening in my head. And I didn't want that this time. This time I was like, the one rule that I had for myself was, if I start to see something representational emerging from the canvas, I would put down my brush. I would rotate the canvas either 45 degrees one way or the other way, 90 degrees one way or the other way. And I would clean my brush, get it more a different color. Whatever I'm working on, stop that.
Yeah.
And rotate things so that now it's unfamiliar again, and then I'd start working again. And I loved that process. On that canvas, there's layer after layer after layer of impasto, thick paint, textural paint. And I could have stopped at any moment, but I was enjoying the process so much that I wanted to keep the process going. So what would have been a really good abstract painting became another really good abstract painting, which became another really good abstract painting, which became another really good abstract painting, until I finally ran out of paint. The canvas weighs a lot. It's got a lot of thick paint on it.
So that's sort of like an additive process, adding the color to the canvas.
Well, it was additive. That's a good observation. But now that I think about it, yes, it was additive. But I also occasionally, if it started to look representational and I put my brush down, then I would pick up a palette knife and I'd start scraping stuff off. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Or I would take at one point I took a belt sander to it, just to see what would happen, and then continue on with additive. So that was kind of a subtractive and additive process for that one.
Yeah, the reason why I said that is that with the pumpkins, it's subtractive, right? So it's
almost entirely, yeah.
Almost entirely. So I just keep asking you. So like, what could you do a pumpkin, like an abstract pumpkin? Like, what would happen? Like, how would you approach it? Would you do it? Would you even try to do it?
I don't know that an abstract in the purest sense of the word, abstract is non-representational of any kind. Mm-hmm. A pumpkin by its nature already is something. It is a certain shape. Mm-hmm. It has a stem on the top. You can take the stem off, but it's still a pumpkin. It's still recognizable because of the shape and the color. I think it would be more interesting to try a cubist sculpt on a pumpkin. Yeah. So it's still a face, but with different points in time. The way I understand cubism is that not only is it showing the shapes, forms, and outlines of something, but that it's also showing the motion. Like, what was it? Nude descending a staircase. Mm-hmm. Yeah, you kind of, if I think most viewers will look at a painting like that and okay, you told me it was a nude, so now I have to see body parts. Mm-hmm. Are there, is there a hip there, or is there the corner of a breast there, or is there a neck or something like that? And you can force yourself, force is a bad word, you can convince yourself that you see something, whether it's actually there or not. I think the human brain is hardwired to see what it wants to see. So if you're staring at something long enough and you're told that it's a nude descending a staircase, you can see the staircase, you can see the nude. But what's interesting to me about that particular painting and cubism like that is that it's the motion, it's the time that's involved in it. And I think like some of Picasso's paintings, and I can't think of any names of paintings right now, but you know what I'm talking about. There's so many of them where you can see the profile and the forward facing image and the profile, and then the 3/4 profile, and maybe another, and maybe the eyes up or maybe the eyes down. I think the way my brain processes that is to look at that and say, this is somebody who is blinking and fidgeting and moving around. Yeah. It's not intended to be a becoming portrait of someone looking stoic. It's supposed to be looking like somebody this, but it's all put into one moment, into one image. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I think that would be more interesting to me, or at least more achievable for me. Mm-hmm. But you have a way, Marcus, of suggesting things in your mild-mannered way that crawl into my brain and stay there, and I think I will probably want to try it at some point.
The reason why I'm asking is also that why a face, even, like, to me it's not that obvious. Um, what alternatives are there? What other
Let me
like
see
you
if I,
can?
am I allowed to share my screen if you wanted?
Sure. Just a second.
Uh,
Go.
okay, let me, that's not a face.
No.
And let's see, what else do I have here? Well, that's a face. That's a potato. Sorry, I didn't want to go into like a show and tell slideshow here, but face. Okay, it's a face, but it's a science fiction, fantasy, horror face.
Lovecraft.
Lovecraft. And I'm trying to find if there's anything that isn't a face here. I think the one that I was thinking of was were the hands, though. Let me go back to that one. There we go.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not abstract by any means. It's definitely representational, but it's not a face. And I've done things similar to that, where I'm building I'll build a display that involves more than just the face. And let me stop. We don't need to keep looking. I just haven't taken it to the extreme yet. Some other pumpkin artists have. I have a couple of friends who I adore. Sue and Andy are two sculptors who have been doing an exhibit at the Bronx Zoo for the last several years. And I hope they do it forever because it's so good. They sculpt mostly animals. The zoo likes animals, and occasionally they'll do dinosaurs. But they'll sculpt polar bears or baby elephants playing with butterflies or something like that. They're not faces. These are full sculptures of the entire animal. Some of the sculptors that I know, the Russians in particular, my friend Dima, who lives in St. Petersburg. Generally, he's a classically trained sculptor, formally trained, definitely not self-taught, but he normally works with ice and sand. He likes ephemeral stuff. He doesn't like things that last, but he also works in clay. He's been experimenting with ceramics and things. But Dima will try anything. And I think when he carved his first pumpkin, I think I watched him carve his first pumpkin. I don't think he'd ever tried it before. We were on a gig together in Arizona, and for him, it's just another medium it's the same process. He's just using pumpkins instead of sand or clay or whatever his normal mediums might be. Trying to think if he did anything non-representational, though. Sue did an interesting one once. It's just a standard-sized pumpkin that she turned into a bat cave. She cut the opening into it, scooped out the inside, created stalagmites and stalactites on the inside, and she had fruit bats hanging from the roof of this bat cave, and they were all carved from sweet potatoes. It's fun watching her carve it because she wasn't using a tool. She was mostly using her fingernails. She was just scraping at the surface with her fingernails. And that bothered me. I was like, oh, you're gonna get a hangnail. You're gonna get a splinter up under there. It's just I can't watch. But her end result was something I hadn't seen before. Those are things that I find particularly inspiring, is when it's something that not only have I not seen it before, I hadn't even thought of it before. And that gives me something, that gives me yet even more to chase.
Yes. So can you explain to me how the community kind of like works? And also, I guess there used to be like a sort of like events and shows and competitions and stuff.
Mhm.
So how is that organized, and how does that work? And like, is there
Really
is
bad.
there any? I mean, it's not. I'm not. Is there any? Do people make a living
Yeah.
carving pumpkins?
Yeah.
Okay. And where does the money come from?
If I knew, I'd be making a better living. Um, the community is still relatively small overall, but with certain television shows, competition shows, like Food Network has Halloween Wars, and in the last couple of years, there's a newer show called Outrageous Pumpkins. They're both competitions. Halloween Wars has teams that compete against each other to build Halloween themed displays. And I think Halloween Wars is, the teams are comprised of one pumpkin sculptor, one cake artist, and one sugar artist, who worked together to create a larger display that includes cake, sugar, and pumpkins. And the goal of that competition is to have kind of a seamless integration of all of those elements.
Mm-hmm.
Outrageous Pumpkins, on the other hand, which I've competed on Halloween Wars. And I know almost all of the pumpkin carvers who've ever been on Halloween Wars. I think there's only a few who I don't know very well.
Mm-hmm.
Outrageous Pumpkins is, I think we did a pilot season 1, and we filmed season 2, which will air this coming October.
Mm-hmm.
I don't compete on that one. I work on the crew for that. I'm behind the camera as the pumpkin consultant. The production company actually calls me the pumpkin artist in residence, and I told them I'm going to get business cards just with that. Deane Arnold, pumpkin artist in residence, Turn Card Productions. Thank you very much. And those are not teams; those are individual artists competing against other individual artists, and it's only pumpkins, and they build things out of pumpkins. They're not just carving a face; they have to create an entire scene with a story made entirely out of pumpkins. So they'll start with a big pumpkin, and they'll start carving it into whatever it is that they want for their story. But then they've got other pumpkins that they'll cut apart, and they'll take material from those pumpkins to add to this. So there is a certain amount of additive sculpting and building going on there as well. What was the question again? Where was I going?
This, I think this was so far like my favorite part of our conversation. This one.
The ones where I go off the rails, right?
Well, just no. I was asking about like how, like, the community, how it works, and why there is a demand. Even like, is it sort of like a novelty thing for people who come to the shows, or are there like real fans that are repeat visitors, and geeks, yeah.
That's the geeks. I usually know them. At this point, there are geeks that I know on site.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a visual person. I don't remember names very well, but I will remember almost every conversation that I have with somebody, and I will remember their face forever, because as they're talking to me, I'm probably not listening to what they're saying. I'm looking at their face and I'm going, okay, now how does that work? So yeah, there are definite fans of the genre. I've got followers all over the world, most of whom I think are pumpkin sculptors in their own right. We all follow each other. It's like a mutual admiration society. And there are people who are not necessarily carvers who just love Halloween. I think the reason, one of the points of your question was, why does this resonate with people, or why is there an attraction to this? And I think what it really comes down to is that it's a familiar thing done in an unfamiliar way. If I set up my carving sculpting materials in my workstation in a public place, which is what I do with pumpkins. But if I did that and I were carving clay, if I was sculpting in clay, I would get, curious looks as people continue on what they're doing. If I'm doing it with a pumpkin, they recognize that. It's something that, at least I don't know what it is around the rest of the world, but in the United States, Halloween is a big thing, and jack-o'-lanterns are familiar, to the point of it's almost like visual comfort food. So if somebody sees me carving a pumpkin, they have more than just, oh, he's sculpting something. They have, oh, he's doing something that I did, that I've done many times, and I've never done it like that before. So I think that there's the universal nature of the familiar recognition of seeing something done, but having it done in such an unusual way. And I hope it stays unusual. I hope it doesn't get to the point where this is so commonplace that it becomes unremarkable. I think that's a big reason why there is an affinity for it on a lot of levels. The community, again, going back to the community, the pumpkin community, love that. Going back to that, I think since I started doing it, I've met some of my best friends. Many of my best friends are either musicians or pumpkin sculptors. And as I said before, I don't like being the guy. I want to see what Dima does. I want to see what Sue does. I want to see what my friend Brandy does. And I can't wait for them to succeed at something, because I want to be bowled over by it. I want the same experience that my viewers have when they're looking at what I'm doing. And I think that's mutual with all of us, that we all can't wait to see what the rest of us are going to do. The community has gotten much, much larger just in the last 3 or 4 years than it was when I started. There are carvers out there now who I've never heard of before. There are carvers out there, I'm sure, who've never heard of me. But it's not the same. It doesn't have the same sense of family community that the longtime core people have had. Now there are people, I don't know anything about them. I don't know what their work is like. I don't know if it's going to be.
It's like the next generation of pumpkin carvers.
Yeah, and it's like, I'm kind of excited to see it. I'm excited to see what that generation will present and how it will manifest itself. At the same time, I'm kind of protective, because I care about the community that I've been in part of for so long. I don't want to be cliquish about it. I don't want to exclude anybody. Anybody's welcome to join. I mean, that's why I encourage people. When I hear somebody saying I can't do that, I'm like, okay, come over here. We're going to try it. I want to expand the community, but the kind of rapid expansion we've had over the last couple of years comes with a certain amount of unknown that could go either way. That sounded ominous, didn't it?
It did. It's awesome. Like, this is getting better and better. It's funny. It's funny when you were saying, I could say about myself, or I guess it's true that what I do, or I am sort of like a musician's musician, and you are a pumpkin carver's pumpkin carver. It's so awesome, because that's what you were saying. Like, the people that are your fans are actually.
Hold on. Let me enjoy this moment. Marcus Reuter just compared me to him.
Did I say that? I don't know, but
yeah,
in a way.
You were recording this, right?
Yeah. No, but it's true. It's true that there is, when it comes to the arts or the crafts, that there are always people who are sort of, I don't want I don't know what the right word is, like pioneers, or like, and it doesn't have to be even professional people. Sometimes it's actually people who are um, like are somewhat hidden, who kind of like do the work that inspires others, right?
Yeah.
And
Well,
I find that.
that old trope about who's the best guitar player in the world. And then Rolling Stone magazine comes out with their list of 100, the 100 best guitarists of all time, and then the arguments ensue. Oh yeah, no. He would no. How come so and so isn't on the list? How come so and so is at number 57 when they should be at? But the the element of that is that there are unknown guitarists, unknown musicians, unknown sculptors who no one has ever seen their work. Maybe they are working in a bubble. Maybe there's somebody, maybe hell. Point of fact, there are people who have never left their studio who are doing incredible things that no one else will ever touch. And we may never see their stuff or hear their stuff.
Yes.
Is that kind of what you were saying?
Yeah. And but then, like, some of these people actually do have fans, like you were saying, but the fans are then actually artists themselves. So this is what I just find fascinating, that there is this. I don't want to say it's a hierarchy, because it's not. It's not a hierarchy of artists, but it's like as if some artists are actually the source of inspiration for a lot of other artists. And this is sort of
Very
like, maybe I was exaggerating when I said that you are pumpkin carver's pumpkin carver, but that sounds good to me.
No, you know what? Actually, all humility aside, I'll cop to that to a degree. There are carvers who are better than I am. There are carvers who are capable of things that I'm not capable of, or that I haven't tried yet. But whenever I show up where there is it like a competition, when I showed up at the Jack Hanna thing at the Columbus Zoo, it happened there. Somebody recognizes me and they go, and that was when I was nobody. But when I was on Halloween Wars, I showed up at the sound stage before shooting started, and two of the other pumpkin carvers spotted me across the sound stage, and I hear, "Deane's here. We can all go home now." Oh, don't do that. Don't do that. And then when I got to Outrageous Pumpkins, knowing that I'm not competing, the cast and those it was 7 carvers, 7 individual pumpkin carvers who were competing on that show. And they get out of the van in the morning and they're getting they're looking their way around. They're getting acclimatized. They're finding where everything goes and getting comfortable with things. They spot me and they go, "Deane's here. We can all go home now." And I'm like, no, guys, I'm not competing.
It's nice, isn't it?
I'm not entirely comfortable with that, but on the other hand, I do recognize that it exists. So yeah, okay, to a point, yeah, I'm a pumpkin sculptor's pumpkin sculptor.
No, but
all 60 of us.
I do understand, though. Like, for me, I do not really understand. Well, I think it's normal that as an artist you don't understand the impact your art has on people, and I don't think it really has anything to do even with your level of craftsmanship. Like, sometimes yes, but it doesn't have to, right? There is, like, sometimes there's just a certain there's something special about how people sing or play or paint, or that sort of touches people. And for me, I don't really understand what that is in my case. I guess I will have my version of that, right? Like, obviously I can also listen to the music that I create. I can be the listener. You can be
the music of Carl Orff.
Yeah, exactly. Or you can actually, like, you actually have your piece in your hands, right? And you can you can consume it like not the person that's made it, right? And that, I think that's sort of like fascinating, and it's wonderful if that's possible. I know that for quite a few,
Isn't that possible for you as a musician?
it
I mean,
is it is
when
it
you're
is possible.
performing or recording, you are listening to it.
Yeah, yeah, it's possible for me, and
So
I
are
can.
you observe, you experience that music not only from the perspective of the performer, you hear it from the perspective of the audience.
I do. I can, and I can do that. And
Do you have to make a mental shift to do that?
um, no, I think it's become my main mode of operation actually when listening is like to zoom out and to. I can't say that I always manage to take the perspective of an outside listener. No, no, but I managed to zoom out and like dissociate myself from the
That's the
situation.
word I
And
was looking for,
yeah,
dissociate.
yeah. I can do that. And I do that most of the time nowadays. But it just comes with practice, with the practice of being on stage.
Mhm.
That's something that's, I would say, very hard to. It's very hard to get to if you just practice at home, let's say, right? So,
Right.
and this is maybe also like you must have had this experience as well, like from like working in your studio and then working in public, which I guess like, are you
It's a
nervous?
totally different atmosphere.
Are you actually, is there something like stage fright for pumpkin covers?
I've never experienced stage fright.
Mhm.
I do experience a heightened degree of e- experience. I've thought about this a little bit because I welcome being on stage, and I don't think, not since I was a little kid. I think I had stage fright when I performed with my mother one time. She was performing folk music someplace, and I usually was along just because where else is she going to put me when I was in grade school? But I was like 8 or 9 years old or something. She handed me a banjo one day and said, "Okay, play this. It's
Mhm.
really easy. Just play this so that I can play this part on the guitar and get the audience singing and in a couple of different harmony pieces." And at that moment, I think that may have been the only time that I ever experienced true stage fright. I mean, where oh no, really? I could feel my whole body kind of like contracting and
Mhm.
recoiling, and
Mhm.
being just as excited about it as I was nervous about it. Since then, um, performing as in public, either as a musician, I don't do that very often. I have in the past, when I was in my teens and in my 20s, I performed quite a bit. But being in public, whether it's acting a part, just being the wise guy, being the class clown, being the center of attention for stupid reasons or whatever, carving pumpkins, playing guitar, singing, whatever, I'm comfortable with it. But there is a heightened level of adrenaline. Maybe that's what it is. It's adrenaline. Sometimes it feels like performance anxiety,
Mhm. Yeah.
but I don't feel anxious most
Mhm.
of the time. But I'd be lying to say that in the moments before going up on stage or being on stage or being the center of attention, that there is a moment, there is a period where I feel like,
So would you say you perform better when people are watching, or?
oh yeah, I think it fuels me.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
and I would presume that you experience something very much the same when you're performing music. That if you're in your studio and practicing and playing and getting it right, recording whatever, that has one level of energy. But if you've got a room full of people who are really into what you're doing, that's gonna power you up to another level. or if you're performing for people, if you got a really tough room and you really have to work for them because they're all having their own conversation, they're in their own world over their supper club kind of thing or something like that, and you're playing your heart out for them, and you're not reaching them, that's going to have a different effect on your performance. It's going to have a different effect on your experience in that moment. I just spoke for you.
You did.
I could need sock puppets.
Like I have to say, like I'm as a player of my music, and this, like with the emphasis on my music, I'm incredibly great at that. I'm
argument.
Absolutely effortless. So for me, I would say it doesn't really matter so much. Like for me, recording on somebody's, like recording a solo for somebody, as an example, I just do one take. I just start playing. I just put I don't even want to know what key it's in. I just press play. I start playing. And it's fascinating how it's gotten to be that way, because obviously it wasn't that way like even 10 years ago, right? But it's on stage is different, because on stage, if first of all I'm performing written music versus improvisation, then like you kind of like have to perform things right, and so I don't know, like
I have a question for you about improvisation.
Yeah.
When you are improvising in front of an audience, I can't remember who the quote was. I can't remember the exact quote or who said it, but somebody, I feel like it might have been Chick Corea, said something about that improvisation is basically pulling out all of the stuff that you've already rehearsed and giving it a sense of coherence in the moment of being. Now I'm really bungling and mangling the quote, but basically he was saying it's stuff you've already rehearsed at some point or another. You're just pulling it out of your tool chest and presenting it in this moment in a new way. That kind of makes sense to me, because I'm not comfortable improvising. I like to know exactly what I'm going to play when I'm doing music.
So whoever said that,
when you are improvising on stage, how much of a risk are you taking? Do you know where you're going at any given moment?
Well, whoever said that is, you could say is completely wrong or completely right. But
it's like that Michelangelo quote.
Like because it's about what you practice. I agree. I agree. So that's why I have always tried to avoid to practice patterns that are musical, right? Because I didn't want my intuitive playing to be biased. Formulaic, or even like biased by the physical movements that I practice. So that's why the physical movements that I was practicing were not based on music, but purely on like moving my hands on the stage that is the fretboard, right? So like just playing chromatic dexterity exercises and stuff like that. So when I improvise, to answer your question, I go for 100% risk, always. And
that's cool.
It's cool. It requires big cojones.
The other half of that is that risk taking can lead to moments of brilliance. But if every time you take a risk, you are guaranteed to get brilliance, then the risk is less. The risk is diminished. In order for the risk to remain a risk, there still has to be the real possibility of failure.
Yeah.
Do you ever take a risk and then feel like, nah, that one didn't work, I'm not going to try that one again? Well, or it didn't work, now I really want to try it again?
Well, you know, usually when on a tour, I get a chance to try again. But then, you know, like what I try to do is not to get into the habit of feeling comfortable with something. Like when I'm just talking about solos here, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
for example, there was the piece Dinosaur that Crimson Project started playing. Well, before it was called Crimson Project, we started playing that song in 2011. And so I maybe performed that piece maybe 130 times with that band. And I tried to, like, that was the solo where I did not want to ever practice anything that like Robert had played on the piece.
Right.
I knew what he had played, so, but I never wanted to practice it. So like sometimes my hands fell into a place where those notes that he played became available. And then I played something in the vein of what Robert did.
Right.
But then sometimes I was just like in a completely different place. I was not referencing the chords or even the root note of you know what the bass was playing. I was just free and I know that I don't know, I don't have a percentage, but most of the times I would say it was not successful. For if you kind of like, and I don't know because I haven't listened to these and there are not that many recordings.
Right.
But
Well, in your sense of what was successful might not line up with what the audience is.
yeah, exactly.
The audience may have absolutely been enthralled by what you did.
And that's the whole reason why I was saying this is sort of like the what I just like said, like you have to have like the balls to do that, right? I think that is kind of like my service or the little bit of service that I can bring towards music, right? Where I can take the risk. I can be the person who just kind of like acts as like you were saying, in a way, the class clown.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like the jester role in music. Yeah, not that guy. More the
That's
yeah,
not
I
you.
know. But I'm talking about that freedom. You know that.
Hello, ladies and germs. Here on the stage for the first time, the comedy stylings of Marcus Reuter.
Reuter, exactly. That's why I was. That's why I was asking you about improv carving pumpkins. You know, because I think it would be awesome. I think you would be really awesome. You could be an absolutely stand out like you already are, but
Right.
you are doing stuff that people like can compare. I wouldn't.
It
Yeah.
wasn't. It was not abstract or impressionist, but it was something that was unplanned.
Mhm.
I was in Phoenix carving, and it was one of these. It was like a pop-up thing. We were working on a sidewalk for a public event. I don't know what they call it in Phoenix, First Fridays or like a gallery hop or something like that. But had one small workstation with one light. We had some display things around us, but my friend Dimitri and I, one of the Russians that I mentioned earlier, Dima, I was carving a pumpkin and I didn't really have any idea how I wanted it to. I just started in and just started sketching and everything. And then Dima's looking over my shoulder and he's bored. He's not carving anything. He's looking over my shoulder. He starts criticizing me. He's like, dude, be careful of your anatomy. Yeah, dude, what are you doing there? And so I got annoyed with him and I handed him my tool and I said, you can do a better job, fix it. So what we wound up doing, it was a good natured thing, but what we wound up doing was he would work for 20 minutes and then I'd grab the tool back from him and I'd work for 20 minutes. And I would cut through things that he was doing and I would add things that I wanted to do. And then he would take the tool back from me, 20 minutes, he'd work for half an hour and he would be correcting all of the things that he didn't like about what I was doing. When we finished, we had a pretty garish looking face. It's like a monster face of some kind or other. I could probably dig it out for you if you're interested.
Yeah.
But it wasn't planned, nor could it have been planned, because as each one of us took took control of the pumpkin and started to do new things to it, it wasn't where we had left it. So I couldn't just pick up where I had left off. Okay, Dima's done with his turn. Now I'm just going to resume what I was doing, because now the whole nature of the thing has changed. He's changed everything about it in the last 20 minutes or half an hour. So this is what I have to work with now. And there was a certain improvisation that went to that. I think I can find that one, but
yeah, it's
don't
like
wait.
no, I'm not waiting. It's like there's in the 90s there were these chain tape communities where you would just send tapes around and everybody would add something, and
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Like,
Yeah, so
like pass the buck mixtapes.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hey, so you wanted to tell me something about, what was it, like the basic structures and then the details? You wanted to explain something about that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I'm personally passionate about that isn't a joke.
Mhm.
I think that there is a truism that most of the world accepts as pure fact that I have issues with. The idea that the details are the important part, that if you have an attention to details, that
Mhm.
that's going to make you a better artist, a better musician, a better sculptor, a better painter, whatever. And I have found the opposite to be true. The
Mhm.
large forms,
Mhm.
in sculpting its forms,
Mhm.
um, that the details are, if you go to the details at the expense of the large forms, the details are going to be useless. The details need the large forms in order for the details to succeed and be the finishing touch. But the details are the finishing touch. And in Impressionism in particular, there are very few details, or the details are not the little tiny pieces that were painted in or sculpted in. The details might be something about the nuance of the expression, as opposed to like a really ridiculous expression like ah. Hang on a second. Are you in a meeting? Hang on a second, Marcus.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back. You can edit that in post, right?
No, I won't.
It is what it is. I just want to make sure there wasn't an emergency downstairs or something.
Yeah. I completely.
The large forms need to be there for the details to have something to hang
Yeah.
on. And
Yeah.
one kind of crude metaphor would be, if you're doing if you're sculpting something like a sexy person, a sexy figure,
Mhm.
if you go straight for the negligee and you sculpt the negligee, if the form underneath it isn't there supporting it, the negligee is just a rag.
Yeah.
It's not recognizable as anything. That's one crude way of putting it. But in Impressionism, like Monet, if you look at Monet paintings, you can see the world that's in there. There's depth, there's light, there's shadow, there's atmosphere to it, even though the brush strokes are all huge and there's nothing in tight focus, but the world exists. And I think that too many of us are so determined to go straight to the details. Like when I teach classes, in my advanced classes in particular, beginners to a certain point, but advanced classes, when a sculptor, I'm going to struggle with this for a second. When a sculptor has experience, they've developed those formulas that you were talking about avoiding when you're improvising.
Mhm.
And once you've got those formulas, they become second nature and you go to them immediately. This is the way the face looks.
Mhm.
But if you can resist going right for the crow's feet or the teeth or the fangs or the scar or whatever it is that you want to do with the details, if you can resist that in favor of the large forms of the expression is doesn't live. Like if I give you a face, like a quizzical face,
Mhm.
the expression doesn't live in the crow's feet or in the teeth. The expression lives in the slightly raised eyebrow over here. And if you go crazy up here, then it becomes extreme.
Mhm.
If you stay with the nuance of those expressions, you can see what the large forms are doing. So
Yes.
when I'm teaching sculpting classes in particular, I have found that the advanced classes are more challenging because of that. I have to teach people to overcome their preconceptions and the formulas that they've established for themselves, which are probably perfectly successful formulas. But what I want to teach them is how to see what they're doing. I
Mhm.
want them to see the shapes and the forms and the angles. And I don't want them to look at this as a nose. I want them to look at this as, if this is a three-sided pyramid, there's the apex, there's one triangle, there's
Mhm.
the other triangle, and down here there's a third triangle. If you can look at that form,
Mhm.
then the rest of that, you can dial into the little bits in the nostrils and the this and that and the other, and the musculature and where the cartilage goes and all the anatomical aspects of it. But if you can break it down to just this
Mhm.
form, and this form, and together I think it's far more valuable to learn how to see things for the shapes that they are, not for what you have preconceived that those shapes to form. And then the same
Yeah.
thing goes with music. If you can avoid your preconception of, this is the way that this is the shape of that scale,
Mhm.
this is the shape of that guitar chord, this is the shape of that piano chord, or whatever it is.
Mhm.
I'm not a particularly experienced composer. I have written some things, and I found that it was much easier for me to write my own material, my own musical material, in my head by hearing it first before I pick up a guitar, where my hands are going to go by muscle memory. My hands are going to
Yeah.
go to the shapes that I'm familiar with.
Mhm.
If I hear it first, then I go to an unfamiliar instrument like a piano, with a keyboard, and I find where the melody goes and where the harmonies are going to go. Is it going to be counterpoint? Is it going to be parallel? Whatever. And then I get to the guitar. By that point, now I've established the large forms. And
Yes.
then I can get to the familiar area of the guitar, and then I can dial in some tight focused details.
Mhm. Mhm.
So there's a lot of crossover in my brain, in my world. There's a lot of crossover between music and visual art.
Yeah. And what you just described is, I would totally subscribe to that, in both musical composition, but also in performing music. Like, the example that came up for me was like, like somebody could have the greatest vibrato, right? A guitarist could have the greatest vibrato, but if you don't play nice notes, like, you may have that detail in the tone, but you also need to play the right notes. And
Right.
that has always been fascinating to me, that like with certain musics, these ratios are different. Like some music requires a specific way how to play something,
Mhm.
and there's other music where it's more important that you play the right notes. So where it's not so much about how you play it, but what you play.
Right.
And yeah, I agree with the the form thing. And when you described like the pyramid here, that even worked for me. Thanks.
Well,
Mhm.
I looked it up. What was it? Aphantasia?
Mhm.
Is that the condition that you described?
Yeah, yeah.
I think that I have hyperphantasia. And I think
Um,
that those two things can communicate. Those two conditions can communicate with each other. For anybody who's going, what, and so nobody has to jump to the University of Google here. Aphantasia is the inability to form mental images. hyperphantasia is the inability to not form mental images of things. I see faces everywhere I look. And I think that what I was describing when I'm teaching experienced sculptors, and I'm trying to get them to set aside their preconceptions and their formulas, and okay, don't think of it as a nose, don't think of it as a line of teeth, don't think of it as an eye, think of it as these basic shapes. I think that my form of hyperphantasia can communicate to your form of aphantasia through the fact that you have an advantage that somebody with hyperphantasia doesn't have. You have no preconceptions as to how those forms will come together to create a face, or whatever representational thing it is. I think faces are easy just because they're so universal. We've all got one. But I find that it's more challenging to get somebody with preconceptions to set aside those preconceptions in favor of seeing things for what it is rather than what they think it is. And I think that your form of aphantasia kind of reminds me to dial it back, to stop being so hyper, and to go for the basics. I think the two things work together with each other. I think you'd surprise yourself if you tried to do a simple face.
Yes. Basically, you just also described why, when I was talking about doing something abstract with the pumpkin, you kind of like came back to the face, right? Like in your so it makes total sense. It's good. Hey, so
it's my comfort zone, and when you talk about it, just occurs to me, when you talk about doing something abstract in a pumpkin, you're trying to pull me into your comfort zone. That's how communication works. You know, you're trying to explain to me where you're coming from. I'm trying to explain where I'm coming from.
Yeah, exactly. So Deane, I want to ask you one last thing. So earlier in the conversation, you said something like, Marcus, knowing a little bit how your brain works. You said that to me. Do you remember saying that?
I remember saying it. I remember immediately regretting it.
Okay, so
I have no idea how anybody else's brain.
So how does my brain work?
Arrogant of me to say something like that.
So how does my brain work?
With a 9-volt battery. No, I think.
What did you mean? What did you mean?
My guess. I think what I was talking about was that you're meticulous and methodical. And I could be entirely wrong about that. You could just but the way you present is you are analytical. That's not to say that I'm not, but I'm all over the place. I'm a shotgun blast of, I can't keep my mind on any one thing at any given time. And I feel from you that you can hyper focus on things in a way that I envy. And I would be very surprised for you to deny that you're hyper focused. I mean, when you do your morning dance routine, your morning motion routine, that's not the practice of somebody who is winging it. So, am I close? How do you think my brain works?
I have no idea.
Neither do I.
Yeah, it's that is something for part 2. Yes, I obviously I do have an idea. No, I'm not saying that I do want to do this again, but we may do this again. Um, no, as a matter of fact, I obviously I do have ideas about how people's minds work sometimes. And I think it's normal. It's like what uh, it's part of the human toolbox. Like
To look for
we
patterns.
to look for patterns, and like what you were saying, like the faces you were making, right? So there's like a pattern of expressions that we learn to read and that have meaning and that convey a certain emotion, let's say, and I think that there is, like I said, like we have this toolbox. We have these um, actions and reactions built into our psyche that kind of like like even with my daughter, like she's 20 months old, right?
Mhm.
Like it's amazing, like the kind of like faces she makes in order to, like she has this thing where she makes one ear very small and the other one very big, and like
Mhm.
it's amazing to see, and I keep asking myself, where does that come from? But I think that there's a layer beyond the surface of the human body, right? There's more to it than just the surface. And
Right.
like you being like the specialist and in like recreating that surface information, that's why I wanted to talk with you, actually, because I think it's amazing. It's like it's the level that I'm least interested in. Like for me it's like behind that smile, like what really is behind that face, right? And for you, I think maybe it may actually be the same, right? But you actually have this way of creating these surface level expressions,
Mhm.
which is amazing to me still.
Well, that's something that has come up again and again when I talk about this. That early on, I realized that the insane expressions, the really wacky expressions, are kind of cop outs.
Mhm.
It's fun to do a monster. It's fun to do a really wild expression, but uh, the more nuanced, subtle expressions are the more compelling to a viewer. They're certainly more compelling to me. I mean, as much as I'll make wild faces. Tony was making fun of me about that at one point. Oh, there's Deane. He's going to make a face. I'm going to cover him up. um, as tempting as those faces are to sculpt and to do, the ones that the expressions that are more compelling are the ones that leave more room for interpretation. If I have a wild Mel Brooks face, like or something like that, I can't even do it without making the roaring noise. If I make a wild face like that, it doesn't leave a whole lot of room. Okay, there's a crazy guy,
Mhm.
or there's a clown or whatever. But if I have a face that looks pensive,
It's
or
it's like,
surprise or something like that, there's more room for the viewer to superimpose their own experience on that, because the human brain is looking for the pattern. What's he thinking, he or she?
Mhm.
And the more that they can, the more possibilities that they have. Okay, well, I think he's thinking that he's surprised. Well, maybe he's not surprised. Maybe he was startled.
Mhm.
Maybe it wasn't so much startle as it's that moment just before fear. People can really dial in, whether they're conscious of it or not. Their brain is looking for that explanation as to why that face looks that
Yeah,
way.
yeah, yeah. It's like a good, maybe I don't need to be judgmental about it, but that just the difference between actors, like good and bad actors, let's say. Like some actors, they can give you that face, but some people can give you the straight face that still has that, where it's like where it's more uh, more resolution and on a smaller surface, like. And yeah, I'm fascinated, like you said, like Bernini is one of your favorites. So I want to see more Bernini pumpkins in the future.
I've got some for you. I have some. I didn't do all of them. My friend Nikolai, my friend Nikolai did one year, and it was the first classical sculpted face I saw on a pumpkin where I went, oh wow, that's awesome. He did the Ecstasy of Saint Teresa, the one where she looks like she's almost having an orgasm, and it was on a pumpkin. And I said, Nikolai, that's exquisite. He looks at it, he goes, this? Oh, I do this because I think he's funny. I thought it would be funny to have a pumpkin having an orgasm. I was like, no, don't ruin it for me. I just want to experience the exquisite nature of your pumpkin. But yeah, he did a Bernini. And I think that's why I personally like Bernini as a sculptor, is because Bernini's expressions and Bernini's level of subtlety, not just in the facial expressions, but where one hand is brushed up against the hip of a body, or grasping a leg or something like that, and it's not an extreme expression or an extreme grasp, but it'll just have a certain subtleness to it about the way the fingers touch the other parts of the skin, and instead of having like this, like Bernini will have something where there's just a little bit of give, and that is more appealing to me than the extreme stuff.
Yes.
I mean, I love Da Vinci and I love Michelangelo and I love all of those guys as Renaissance sculptors, but Bernini is the one who, it's because of the subtlety, and the subtlety makes it more compelling to me.
Yes. Okay, dude. 2 hours of pumpkin talk.
You're gonna have to edit this down.
Hey, thank you so much.
That would involve some effort.
Yeah, no effort.
This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. It was really fascinating. I learned a lot, and I really did. And yeah, maybe at some point, like if I keep doing these, like we could talk again at some point. I don't know. I have no real plans for this format, so we'll see.
Well, it's too bad we'll be so busy when we get to camp, because it would be cool to actually do something where we're in the same room together and I teach you. Let's do a simple face.
Let's see what's going to happen.
But I don't think we're going to have time for it.
Yeah. Okay, my friend. Take care. Yeah. Bye.
My best to the baby.
Yes.